Gotcha. All right, you ready to go?
Yes.
Welcome to another Sunday Superversive live stream. I am your host Benjamin Wheeler, and today me and Anthony are talking about the state of Shonen Jump in 2024. Quite frankly, I'm mostly bored. The only things I'm reading are Kagurabachi, One Piece, My Hero Academia, Chainsaw Man. Well, of the Sunday, the main shonen, the main show. Uh, I'm barely reading anything at all. But of things like Chainsaw Man, of course, I was reading. I was reading Wild Strawberry, but I'm not reading that anymore. It's just isn't a lot for me to enjoy. We'll go into more detail later. But Anthony, how do you feel about things?
Um, to be honest, there is rarely like a ton of different things in Shonen Jump that I'm loving at any one time. So, and I think
Mm,
it would be unfair to expect that. So, I'm not sure if I would say that the magazine's like in a bad place or anything. I don't know if that's really true or not. Uh, I'm enjoying. So, My Hero Academia is in the middle of its final arc. It just made some surprising, in my opinion at least, story decisions that I
really?
really enjoyed. Uh, Did you not find it surprising?
Uh, I kind of was surprised, but in a different way. And I'll let you go first, then I'll talk about.
Sure. I mean, part of it, like, I'm an unironic fan of My Hero Academia. The
Mm,
final arc is far from perfect. The story is far from perfect. But I think ultimately its strengths are such that it will be remembered as a classic, right?
mm,
Not a masterpiece, but a classic.
yes,
You know, same vein of like Yu Yu Hakusho or something. I don't consider Yu Yu Hakusho a masterpiece, but I think it is in the rank of classic. My Hero
yes.
Academia is kind of like that.
It's a
Uh,
certified hood classic, as they say, in the hood.
yes, and it will be remembered years from now. I think very fondly, right?
Mm-hmm.
But with that said, it is far from perfect. I acknowledge that, but I think that the strengths are such that I've still been enjoying it. This final arc, I think, has been a bit of a mixed bag, but works more than it hasn't. Uh, like some things I agree with, like the common criticisms. Some things I don't. Like the whole fight with All Might versus All for One, where All Might used the mech suit. Uh, right. By the way, if
Mm-hmm.
you are not caught up, that probably sounds absolutely bizarre to you. So sorry. Just for the record, on everything we're talking about, we're gonna be spoiling it because it's necessary for a full like conversation.
Yes.
So get used to it. Anyway, yeah, like I want to have full conversations about like what's going on. I
Yes.
don't want to be like, oh, and you just recommend you should read. That's a different thing. Yeah, but with My Hero Academia, like the fight with they called it the Iron Knight fight. You know, I actually thought that was fantastic.
It
And
wasn't
part of
bad.
it is what was that?
It wasn't bad.
So my thought is it was always to me obvious and necessary that All Might was going to come back into the narrative in some major way, right?
Yes.
It was also like Horikoshi had been sending death flags literally since All Might's introduction. Uh, like quite literally from the very first chapter, he was like quote he was waving death flags. However, Horikoshi also really doesn't like killing characters to the point of obnoxiousness. So
Yeah.
I was not 100% convinced that All Might was ever going to die, especially when he was pushing and pushing that All Might was going to die for such a long time and he kept not. It made me more and more convinced that he was specifically going to subvert it. Uh,
Mm.
However, I thought so. I knew that All Might was going to come back. If you had asked me to guess, and to be fair, it wasn't a very like hard guess. It wasn't like I'm sure this will happen, but I would have said he would come back to like take a bullet type thing, right?
Right.
Uh, that's
A
what I was
classic
expecting.
maneuver.
Yeah, that's what I was expecting. I was expecting like a take a bullet type thing. I wasn't 100% sure that's how it would go. I also thought there was a very strong chance then that All Might's vestige shows up uh,
Mm-hmm.
later on and communicates with Deku. which is also a classic thing, right? And it fits with
Yeah.
Horikoshi's Star Wars stuff. But I wasn't like 100% convinced this was how it would go. This was just like if it were me doing this story in the style Horikoshi's doing it, that's what I would get. I would have guessed, but with a lot of latitude for how it could go. So when All Might showed back up in the story, I was not surprised. I was actually more surprised that people were surprised.
Right.
I'm like they were just gonna not use him. You know,
Yeah.
he's been there the whole time. I would have been okay with All Might dying. Don't get me wrong; he's a great character. He's gonna go down as like a classic character in shonen adventure, and deservedly so. But he's also the mentor figure. Mentor figures die. That's what happens, right?
Yes.
Uh, so I would have been okay if he had died. Like I would have been like, yeah, that tracks. Uh, but giving him a suit so he could have a final fight with All for One, I thought was actually a really clever way of doing it because it gives the reader, it's ultimately a shonen adventure story, right? Or a shonen action
Mm-hmm.
story. So it gives the reader like All Might, instead of showing up and taking a bullet, this was essentially the same thing, except he got to have a full final fight, right?
Right.
Which I'm like, okay, you know what? That's pretty cool. I saw people criticizing that the fight breaks the universe. I strongly disagree with this.
I do
This
not
was
understand that concept.
Yeah, the idea is that, well, then why don't they just equip everyone with the suit? But All Might makes it clear that he is rich as hell, and he used his entire fortune on the suit,
Right.
which so I feel like
I mean,
you
he
can't.
merchandised himself. He sold out, Anthony. He was a sellout. All those different, like, little statues and the posters and the movie deals.
I've seen people go like, "Oh, if Deku loses his powers at the end, he might end up using, he might have a suit like that." I've gone back and forth on if that's plausible, and my conclusion is like maybe, but I don't really think so. And even then, I don't think the suit breaks the universe because I don't think that they. I think it's pretty clear in narrative that the suit was like a extremely expensive passion project for All Might,
Right.
right? That you
It,
just could not, like, literally the resources don't exist to make it for everyone.
yeah.
You know.
And there's,
So
it's like when people talk about like going to the moon or something. It's like, yeah, technically, you get a big enough firework, you can go all the way to the moon. But quite frankly, you're not going to do it. You're not going to figure out all the technology that's required for it. Uh, it requires resources that only the super rich have. That's why you never see, a real like, African dictatorship going into space or whatever. Though
yeah,
Space
I'm thinking it
Zimbabweans
over
is
and trying to
terrifying.
figure out how good that analogy is, and ultimately, I think it's pretty good.
Yeah.
Uh, I think that works. You're right. Like, and thematically, I think the fight worked very well. The whole point
Mm-hmm.
of the other thing too is that I don't really agree with the criticism of All for One that a lot of people are like All for One's stupid. He's not good. He's not actually a good villain. I think that's a misunderstanding of the character.
Mm-hmm.
Like the character as a mastermind villain, you have to remember that he wasn't a mastermind in the sense of like the whole joke is like all according to Keikaku, like the Aizen thing, right? Uh,
Yeah.
but he wasn't actually that type of mastermind. That's a misunderstanding of what the character always was.
Yeah.
He was a character with backup plans. He did not like it was not all part of the plan for him to lose to All
Right.
Might, right? He it was never indicated such. He intended to win both of his fights with All Might.
Yep.
What made him different was that he had a backup plan in case those failed, right?
Yes.
And that's what we're seeing here. Like he goes into the fight extremely confident that he will win, and even if he doesn't, he has backup plans to backup plans, right?
Right.
Uh,
Which
so I
is
don't
a
think.
different
Go
thing,
ahead.
which like when it comes to like characterization and stuff like that, like there's, all according to Keikaku, those type of guys. But quite frankly, they're also characters who don't, fight on the front line. Light only went on the front line in a mental game. Quite frankly, I think Light would have broken under torture. If they had actually like suspected him and decided to put the screws to him.
Ooh, that's interesting.
Like, but they
The
didn't.
thing about yeah, I've always been a big fan of Death Note more than you. I think I've
Yes.
been a big fan of Death Note, which is fair. But the thing about Death Note that you realize is that L was way smarter than Light,
Yes.
and I don't think this was intentional. I don't think this is a mistake, right? Like, it is
Mm.
clear that the reason that I admire Death Note so much is that I feel like they sort of set up the story by giving the villain of the anti-hero, really, in this case, right, every advantage. Like, the whole idea is that it's a cat and mouse story where one side has holds basically every card, and then they just keep giving him more and more cards, right?
Right.
And then that's the genius of the first chapter of Death Note and why it goes down as, even though the logic doesn't entirely hold up. For example, technically speaking, L should not have announced himself. Like, it was a tactical error.
Mm.
It still holds up as one of the all-time great first chapters of any manga, because I don't know about you, but when I was reading it and watching the pilot episode, my thought was immediately, like, I don't even understand how you could have a story. Like,
Yeah.
he just has it. Like, how do you even have a story with this? He just has an untraceable killing machine. Like, what do you even do?
Oh
And the
yeah.
genius of the first episode is that L immediately comes up with a way to narrow things down, and then suddenly your perspective on the whole situation is flipped, and you're like, okay, so there are things you could do, and actually, like, it's just a really, really dangerous game that they're playing. Yeah. Uh,
Yep.
so it's an all-time classic first episode and a great way of introducing it. And even though it wasn't technically like the tactically correct thing to do, narratively it was 100% the play to have L announce himself there and give you a clear idea of the stakes,
Yep.
right? Uh, oh my, so yeah, Light is that sort of villain. He's really not a mastermind villain. Uh, when you actually go into like his actions, he makes a lot of errors, and he could have won easily if he was, just didn't poke the bear, right? Which is the
Yep.
whole point. He pokes the bear a lot. Uh, what Light is very good at is improvising. Light is very, very good at coming up with things on the fly and you know manipulating people in the moment. Like, this is how he manages in one of the most famous episodes of the show, when the female detective figures out that he did it. He manipulates her into her giving him her contact information so that he could kill
Yes.
her. It's a very famous moment in the show, but it's notable in that that was actually all off of a mistake. Like, yes, it shows why Light is such a formidable villain, but he wouldn't have had to do any of that if he hadn't messed up in the first place.
Right. And it's
All
it.
for One, I think, is similar to that, but
Yeah.
different in that, unlike Light, he has like intentionally made backup plans. Light changes things on the fly. All for One says, "Okay, this didn't work, but I'm still an invincible god, man." Like,
Right.
right. So there's not much for me to really worry about.
I've brainwashed so many children. You know, I
Hmm.
I will never fail just on the backs of my child soldiers. That is everything you need to know about One for All or All for One.
By the way, that was one of the dumber things that Horikoshi did, was naming his villain after the power. It's very confusing and unsatisfying.
Really?
Uh, I don't like it.
Huh.
Uh, I don't like. So the reason that I don't like it is because it just makes conversations about it confusing.
That's fair.
I,
I
I,
ne
I get why he did it. Like,
Yeah.
narratively, it makes sense. I just don't like it. But yeah, so currently in My Hero Academia, I don't really have a problem with All for One. Basically, what I'm getting at is, yeah, All for One's absolutely not perfect. He does make mistakes, but that makes him a good villain. He makes mistakes for thematic and narrative reasons. Like, why do they ultimately defeat him? Well, because All for One put all of the eggs in the basket of himself, right?
Yep.
Ultimately, whereas All Might trains the next generation,
Yep.
and the next generation is the one that takes him down. Like, that's not a bad villain, that's a good villain,
Yep.
right? Like, the reason he loses is his fatal flaw. That's good thematic writing. So I don't really have a problem with him in the final arc. I thought Bakugo's fake out death was stupid. Will always be stupid. Nobody liked it. Everyone is correct. I
Yes.
hated it. Uh, him being the one to defeat All for One was fine. Uh, Good scene. Yeah,
Yep.
good ending for Bakugo's character. I liked it. Uh, However, what I really liked, I liked the final fight, like him using. Again, it was going back to that theme of like, why was he losing? Well, All Might's suit was replicating the different quirks of the next generation that he had helped to nurture, right?
Mm-hmm.
So literally, he is losing to, All Might's proteges that are personified in the suit that he made, designed based off of their stuff. There's also the fact I'm not sure how good the suit would be for any random person. All
Right.
Might is literally one of the most experienced fighters in the series. In fact, I would say probably the most experienced outside of All for One himself.
Yeah.
Uh, so he, of course, is going to be very good at using the suit, but I don't know if anybody else would be.
Right.
Uh,
Because it's like things like, I don't know, in writing, alliteration. You might be like, well, this good person did alliteration. Why can't I do alliteration? Okay, why did the good person do alliteration? I don't know. Like, what does it serve? How does it work? What does this do for the thing that they're doing? I don't know. Well, he's fighting the closest thing they have to a god, uh, who has a million powers, including powers he just keeps just for giggles. Uh, and
mhm.
he's just a normal dude. You think that that's gonna be easy? Like you think that he can just fist fight, this physical god? No. He needs specifically an edge, and a super powerful suit like that is exactly the kind of edge that one is reasonable for the technology provided to the characters in the story, who seem to have everything from cloning to super genetic manipulation. There's geniuses that are quirks, that sort of thing. And it's like, yeah, no, I fully believe that All Might could get a suit like that. I fully believe that it is reasonable for him to have a suit like that. And I think it's weird that people are complaining about it. Um,
Yeah, there were other things too. Like people, the complaints seem to be like, well, All for One should have just one shot the suit, which again, I think misunderstands the fact that All Might is the person piloting it, right?
yes.
Like,
And
yeah,
he
maybe if
tried.
it were anyone else, but it's All Might piloting the suit.
Right.
And there's more than that as well. Like the other thing that people sort of forget is that All Might lost.
Yep.
Like he did defeat him. Like yeah, it
Yep.
took a little bit longer, but ultimately, how long did that fight last in real time? Probably 5 minutes. Yeah,
Maybe.
like he defeated him pretty quickly.
Yes.
Uh, so yeah, that's the other thing. It reminds me of the people who complain who go like, "Well, Ray can't be a Mary Sue unless you think Luke is a Mary Sue because he stood up to Darth Vader." And I remember Mahler going like, "Do people not remember that Luke lost this fight? Like, that's kind of the same thing. It's like All Might, never should have survived in that suit. It's like, well, he didn't. He was
Right.
about to die. Uh, yeah. So there's that as well, which is another reason it doesn't bother me. Also, the fight has one of my favorite lines in the entire series. When the fight begins and All Might says, what you forget, old friend, is that I never begin a fight that I expect to lose." And I was like, "Oh man, that's actually that's 10 of 10.
Yeah.
Uh, that's a hype line." Uh,
Yeah, no, it's pretty
but
hype.
people also some people though this one didn't get a lot of traction because everybody kind of immediately jumped on the idiots who said this. But like people were like, "Hey, bro, Night Eye said there was a prophecy and he just kind of broke it." And then it's like, yeah, but like they already explained how that worked. Yeah, Deku already broke the prophecy. It can be broken by like extreme force of will. There's also like the very strong religious angle in the fact that All Might, so the Almighty, right,
Yes.
is going up against the devil and is going to be defeated until the prayers of the faithful come in and like change the outcome of the fight. Uh, it's a very strong, and I probably intentional, though I can't be sure because it's Japan. Uh,
Mm.
but I think probably an intentional religious angle to the fight. Uh, so yeah, I thought that was great. I really like that. The Bakugo fake out death was dumb. Having Mirio Moon all for one. I know that there are people who like that. I do not. It just felt like a waste of a really cool character. That the best thing he could think of to do with him is have him Moon Shigaraki. Uh, was just really it just felt weird to me. You
Yep.
know. However, so I thought this is where we'll get to like what's currently going on and where I was surprised and you said you were surprised for a different reason. So I'll tell you why I was surprised. We're in like the end game of My Hero Academia. I thought we were within literally like the last 3 chapters of this fight maybe and then a couple chapters of epilogue, right? Like I thought we
Sure.
were at the very very end. Uh Deku at this point has managed to launch himself into Shigaraki's mind, break through all of his defenses by giving away One for All so that they help him through the mindscape, right? And finally figure out what's really going on, which is that Tenko, who's Shigaraki's real name, was an abused child, right? Who is doing this because, and now maybe Deku can do something to help him, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I thought what would happen is that he would learn All for One would vestige would show up, which is what happened. So that didn't shock me. I thought that there was a pretty good chance that that might happen. I thought after All for One revealed that he was behind everything, that Shigaraki would realize that he was manipulated and he would decay the mindscape, right?
Right.
And kill everybody there, and Deku would be forced out, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that's how the fight would end. Like I thought that was we were at the end of the fight, and that's what would happen, right? Like it seemed like it was all set up for this. That is not what happened. Uh, so I gotta say, I predicted this very wrong. After All for One reveals that, yeah, he did it. He's behind everything. He even gave Shigaraki the decay quirk by like manipulating Overhaul's quirk or something. Uh, Not that that really matters, but yeah, giving him some
No,
like
he uh it was just a random quirk that had a decay. Like it's
no.
similar
So he
to
described it as being similar to Overhaul's. Had a
oh,
regen and a decay like Overhaul's quirk,
yeah.
but he took out the regen and
Yeah.
strengthened the decay, uh,
I
which is
must have
kind of
missed
neat.
that part.
Yeah, it's a little confusing, but it's kind of neat. And I don't think it's actually Overhaul's quirk. It's like
Oh, okay.
similar to Overhaul's
Yeah.
quirk. Uh, anyway, so he says all of this, right? And then he freaking like kills Shigaraki, although it's implied that he's not dead, because of course he's not.
Mm.
But at the very least, he like shoves Shigaraki's tongue, goes, right, this guy's irrelevant. I'm in charge now. Thank you for destroying all of his mental defenses, so that's easy for me to take over. Uh, then he shoves Deku out of Shigaraki's mind, takes over his body with all of his powers, and as a result of all this, All for One is now in charge of Shigaraki's body with all of his powers, though he's apparently somewhat injured. But then they cut to Deku, who has lost both of his arms, which
Which
are
he had
now blood. Yeah,
sorry,
go
yeah.
ahead.
Which he had lost due to Shigaraki's decay quirk within the mindscape.
Yes, which are now bloody stumps. And the chapter ends with uh, Tape Guy coming back to rescue Deku after before All for One shots him, and then Aizawa appears after and Tail Guy gets a hit in, and then Aizawa appears and says, "Sorry, we're late," and end chapter. Uh, I gotta say, I did not think we were in the part of the story where things go from bad to worse. I thought we were past that. I thought we were at the ending.
Mm.
So I actually genuinely am not really sure what is going to happen next. Like, it's implied that Shigaraki is not dead, which of course he's not, because Horikoshi absolutely won't kill him. I'm also
Right.
100% sure that this won't be like a bad ending. You know, it's just not that type of story at all. It would be bad, like, it would be a mistake if it was. So those options are out.
Right.
But I gotta say, like, I gotta give Horikoshi credit. He can do this occasionally. Maybe it's because My Hero Academia normally follows shonen tropes pretty closely. At the times where it deviates, I tend to be caught pretty by surprise. And this is one of those times. Like, I did not think that we were going to go here. I genuinely don't even know what Deku could possibly do at this point. Uh, I can think of at least two ways Deku can get his arms back. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
Eri could do it, or Overhaul, whose quirk still works, I believe. Uh,
He
I
just
think
doesn't
like
have
his
any
quirk,
hands.
he doesn't have any hands, but I think it was mentioned at one point, like in passing, that his quirk had evolved and now he could use it without his hands.
Really?
So maybe Overhaul could repair Deku's arms.
Sure.
It was like it's very in passing. Like it's not a main thing at all. Like it might have been like, Horikoshi in an author's note or something. Uh, I actually think that might have been it. He might have mentioned it in like an author's note at some point.
It's kind of
Uh,
BS.
no, quirk evolutions are a thing.
No, I mean the fact that he just said it in an author's note for a main arc villain.
Yeah, but he literally has never appeared in the story again.
No, he shows up. He was hanging around with Lady
Oh,
Nagant.
yeah, that's true. He does show up. Forgot about that.
So either, something's happening that does have, you know, him using his quirk, and that's how we know about it because he has the, opportunity to do it, or, it's just kind of them being BS about it.
Maybe.
I don't know.
There's also Eri. So
Yep.
like, there's no way I can't see Horikoshi ending the series with Deku having no arms.
Well, he'd have
Uh,
robot arms or something.
yeah, that's true. He could do something like that too.
Like they've
Uh,
established high cybernetics. Like it's, and I'm pretty sure he's a one for all's inheritor on the will.
yeah. There. The other thing too is that like honestly, after this fight, like Deku is going to go down as that. This is the whole point of the story. They say it
Yeah.
literally from the first chapter. He's going to go down as like the greatest hero society has ever seen, so he'll be well taken care of. But yeah, I genuinely. So this is why I'm surprised. Like I genuinely don't know where the story is going to go from here. Like I'm sure with Aizawa's presence. So by the way, can I just say that I absolutely love Aizawa's power from like a power scaling perspective. It's such a
Mm.
brilliant idea for a power, because it is incredibly powerful, but in incredibly like limited situations, right?
Right.
It has the perfect balance of being. It would be broken if it didn't have the the limitations that it has.
Right.
Uh, it's such a clever
He
idea.
can cancel. By the way, anyone he's looking at, he can cancel out their quirks.
Yeah, exactly. So
So
him
yeah.
showing up gives them a chance, right? Which is
Yep.
what makes it so that will be interesting. But I don't actually know what Deku is going to do here. Like I'm not even sure what Horikoshi's plan is. Like
Yeah.
what Deku even do at this point?
Yeah. It's pretty out there. I this hero's down and out, and it's like, his friends are showing up, but most of his friends were wiped out by other villains. Like, it's implied that Uravity was nearly killed by Toga Himiko, and there's a whole bunch of other stuff going on that they're still fighting out. So it's like, you know,
Yeah, it's the also ran characters who are there. Sugar Rush shows up,
yep.
Sero shows up, and Tail Guy, who, like, by the way, kudos to Tail Guy for even being here. Like,
So what's your ability? I've
I'm
got a
gonna be
good
honest.
tail.
If Tail Guy had decided to sit this one out, I don't think anyone would have blamed him. Uh,
He can do what? Yeah, he can literally disintegrate anything he touches. All my abilities use touch. Huh.
and by all your abilities, you mean, well, I can swing my tail around really hard.
I'm good at balancing. I know kung fu. Come on.
Uh, yeah, so the also ran villains have showed up, and Aizawa, or heroes, I mean, have showed up, and Aizawa has shown up, which sort
Right.
of gives them a shot. But Deku's gonna like they're not gonna end it with the also ran heroes winning the day. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm sure to make some sort to make a thematic point, they will have a major role to play, and they already have for that matter. But like Deku's gonna do something else before this ends. They're not gonna just sideline him.
Right.
You know, I just don't know what. Like, he has no arms. They're literally bloody stumps. Like, he's bleeding out at this point.
Listen, I've seen plenty of JoJo at Bizarre Adventures here. These people, like especially in part 3, just absolutely ridiculous nonsense of damage soak. He's got this. He's still got this, Anthony.
So what was surprising about this chapter to you? Because what was surprising to me is that I thought the story was going to end, and that took a turn for, oh no, actually you're all super screwed. Uh, and I didn't think we were. I thought we had already passed that point of the story. So what about it surprised you?
So, I guess I'm surprised by. I guess I can't remember. I would guess I was more surprised by the reaction to it that you mentioned. Like I do not interact with fandoms ever. They're dumb. They're stupid. Most of the time, they're filled with people who just want to make porn of things. Uh, but then you look at things like, reactions to it. Like, how do I want to put it?
They're dumb.
They're dumb. They're just dumb. I don't get it. Like, this is a perfectly cromulent way to have the plot line go through things. There's nothing unusual about what's going on here, except in the sense of it would not make sense except it's inside the story. Uh, all kinds of things like that. And it's kind of, I don't know. It's just kind of weird because it's like, what do you mean you didn't, like, how do I want to put it? Like, did you really think that one for all? Like, I'm trying to figure out how to say this, while also being swarmed by alien bugs. Uh, well, actually, technically, I'm the invader in this context, but whatever. Uh, I've got the mineral rights. Dang it. Uh, it was already said that All for One uh, had been trying to brainwash Shigaraki to be the next him, to accept him into his life, to I don't know what. It's weird, it's groomy, it's all kinds of things like that, and I mean that in the narratively good way, which is hard to explain without saying things that can be clipped out of context. As a character, this makes sense for one for all's sorry, all for one's mo. He's in there. He's in the mind. He's been in the mind. I was kind of, I guess I was a little shocked about how hands off he was. Like all he did was basically like encourage the dad to be a little more harsh on Shiggy, baby Shiggy and stuff like that. And it's like that's it. Yeah, that's all I needed to do. It's like okay, but at the same time, we're dealing with the main villain of the story. It's kind of difficult to just kind of accept that all he did was have the odd conversation or something. And I know he did a little more than that, but do you get what I'm saying? Like
Yeah, so
like he like
basically you're not really surprised by any of the major reveals here. You're surprised that people are surprised by them.
yeah, but I'm also a little bit surprised that Horikoshi felt the need to the father being abusive. Couldn't the father just be abusive? it has to all come back to One for All. Like it's like I felt that the guy had plenty of reason to hate on heroes and stuff like that already. I don't think he needed to be like manipulated by All for One, uh, to abuse his son more than he was gonna do already. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and this has been one of the big complaints from fans is like it kind of takes away from a criticism of society as a whole
Mm.
that All for One is the one who is doing this, but my argument would has always been, and people have I've said this to people, and they've tried to argue back with me about it, and I still think I'm right. All for One represents society, like that's the whole point of the character.
Okay.
Uh,
Yeah,
he's the
I'll accept that.
personification of all of the worst. He's the personification of all of the worst things about society. Uh, I thought his flashback chapters were some of the best in the series. Actually, I thought they were fantastic. Uh,
Hmm.
when we show like how he grew up, and then you realize like, yes, he was kind of a bastard from birth, right?
Yes.
But there's it's not entirely fair to say that like that's true, but there's some subtlety of it because
Yes.
it's also the fact that like he was a bastard from birth, but he literally had no one like he reached out a hand to his brother. Nobody reached out a hand to him. His mother
Right.
didn't reach out a hand to him. She died, right? So it's obviously not entirely her fault, but
Yeah.
society left him behind. So he decided that he was going to become the enemy of all society, right? Like
Hmm.
he was going to be the worst parts of society. So I think that All for One represents the worst parts of society. Like that's what he is. You know, all of this manipulation and things like that. It all stems down to the fact of like there was no like there was nobody there but All for One, right?
Yeah.
Like sure he might have manipulated things, but the very fact that he was able to do this as a whole in society. I do think though that of this theme, Endeavor does a better job of representing it, right? Because the whole
Yes.
point of the character of Endeavor, he also, in a different way, represents society, which is the reason that Endeavor has to be redeemable in some way.
Mm-hmm.
Because the whole point is like, you need to. Can society be salvaged? Is there something to save? Yes, right? There is something to save.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's something valuable. Like, ultimately Endeavor is a horrible human being, or he was anyway, if you want to say he's not anymore, right?
Yes.
He was a horrible person. He was abusive to the point of absolute like he was monstrous.
Yes.
But he was not entirely bad. The fact of the matter is that he did work as a hero. He put his life on the line to save other people, right? You don't do that even if it's for glory, right?
Right.
He picked a job that involved him saying, "I am going to put myself in danger of death to save people I do not know." Right? There is something there that is selfless, that is heroic,
Yes.
right? Yeah, it does not excuse the things that he did, but to say like, is there anything worth saving? Yeah, that's an impulse that's worth saving, right?
Yeah.
There is something, and there is a core in Endeavor that clearly chose the route of helping people, right? That maybe you could reach, which is what the story has been about, which they did reach, I would argue, right? That
Mm-hmm.
Endeavor did change as a person. Uh, Now, the Todoroki storyline has always been the most well written part of My Hero Academia, and to me, it's clearly Horikoshi's baby. Like,
Yes.
it's the part of the story that he's felt the most strongly about and has the best writing. And I think that I really liked all of it. I even liked the final fight with Dabi. I thought was very good. Uh, I think that Dabi is like 99% certain that he is alive. I
Mm-hmm.
think he has to be alive for the story to work
I mean, I
because
thought he had survived, but you know.
Yeah,
Hmm.
you're absolutely like I think it's pretty clear he survives. I think he's going to survive because I think him dying lets Endeavor off the hook, which you can't do,
Right.
right? Like if he dies, then that yeah, it's too easy, and that's also why Endeavor can't die, right? Because
Yes.
Endeavor dying lets him off the hook. It's like no, you need to put in the hard, long, boring work, right?
Yep.
Arguably, but of repairing the relationships in your family, you know, and it's not something that you get to escape, right?
Yes.
You actually need to go in day after day with this kid who hates you for very good reason, with a family that is angry at you, right, for very good reason, and you need to go in every day and say, yeah, I deserved it, and now I'm actually going to put in the effort to repair this,
Yep.
right? And it's not something that will change overnight. It can't. That's not how that works.
Right.
But you don't get to escape it.
It's
Yeah.
one of those things where like you can wake up every day and choose the better choice. You know, it's unfortunate that there's no like Christianity in this society because then you could have, you know, a redemption arc that means something more than every day he has to wake up and choose the good in a godless society.
I think so. I think that Deku, even though it's not explicitly Christian, uh, I think that Deku does represent the more Christian view. Like, one of the things that got a lot of flack, and in this case, it's understandable why people gave it flack, but I still don't agree, and
Mm,
you'll agree with me, is that Deku said, you know, Totoro, like, basically, you know, Shoto, I think you should forgive him, right?
yep.
And everybody got really mad at this, right?
Yeah.
Like, who do you think you are? Why do you think? But Deku isn't telling like everybody in the family, you know, you're doing something wrong for not
Right.
doing. There's a distinction here,
Right.
right? He's not saying you are the one in the wrong for not forgiving him. What he's saying is very specifically, it would be better, right? The right thing to do, the thing that will heal the most, is forgiveness. Yeah,
Yes.
and I could totally see why other people, like why basically non-Christians, right, would be
Mm-hmm.
mad about this because they're right in a sense. It is presumptive, but that's what we've been commanded to do.
Yep.
Like I would tell people, you know what you need to do. You need to forgive them, and if they go like, "Do you understand what he did?" It's like I do, right?
Yeah.
Like, and you're absolutely right. Like every criticism you have, everything you have to say, you're entirely correct, but you should forgive him,
Yep.
right? And I think that's what Deku was doing. Like, he wasn't telling them, like, hey, if you don't forgive him, you know, you're morally in the wrong, which isn't quite the same thing. Like, there's a distinction there. He's saying that, you know, what would be the way to heal the most, right? Like, the thing that
Mm.
will bring about the most healing will be forgiveness.
Yep.
And it's not explicitly Christian, but I think that that's the sort of thing that comes from like the vestiges of a Christian culture, right? It's
Yes.
absolutely not Japanese. It's Western,
That's a good point.
right? That is a purely Western idea, meaning
Yeah.
Christian in this case.
And there's something to be said for a lot of the you know experiences of the people who are big fans and are of course on the internet perhaps too much. You know, a lot of them go to places they've never really understood forgiveness. You know, they can't understand it
Hmm.
even, not without Christ. You know, there's a reason why, you know, part of Proverbs says, hey, discipline your kids. But then it says in a, you know, a couple chapters later, hey, don't provoke your children to wrath. You know, it's they're very, you know, um, the ideas form into each other. You are supposed to discipline your kids so they don't grow up to be little shits. You are also supposed to keep them from becoming wrathful towards you because you will destroy their ability to have, you know, things like forgiveness and whatnot. Because what will happen then is they'll hold on to their negativity all their lives. And sure, in some cases, that could create, you know, a diamond, you know, who overcomes uh, horrible things and mental anguish to become something great. But quite frankly, most people aren't that. In fact, most people can't even comprehend making a good choice for themselves in the long term. I know I struggle with that. I know I see tons of people struggle with that every time I go work at a bar. It's like, hey, buddy, you look about the right type of drunk to enjoy a Denny's slamwich, Grand Slamwich. It's like, no, I want to drink some more. I'm not letting you do that at my bar, but you can try. I don't want to just, give the usual statement of the masses are stupid, but you know, how can they forgive without one an example of forgiveness like Christ, and two, how can they forgive without a morality that lets them, forgive? If everything's wrong and you've been wronged and you've got to go to therapy forever for it, well, guess what? You're never actually going to solve the issues with your dad, even if the issues, well, depending on if the issues exist or not. And for a lot of these kids these days, the issue simply doesn't exist, or the issue isn't so much daddy was bad to me, it's daddy was bad to me because he was too easy on me, or something similar. He didn't do his fatherly duty in the opposite sense of what they mean, or they put the foot down too hard or too weirdly or, insufficiently. It's one of those things where it's like, okay, so what happened? Okay, so he was weak. Okay, so he disciplined you, but he never kept it together, and you weren't given a solid backing by which you can think through your problems. Blah blah blah. There's a thousand little things that humans need to develop strong minds and wills. Part of that is if they can't even um, uh, discuss art without making it about them, well, you know, how can they?
Yeah,
It's hard for me to even say if they're sentient or not. Are they sentient? Can they actually think about something that isn't to do with their OCs? I don't know. I don't know.
yeah, you get this from people who sometimes the more self-aware ones will admit that's like, I don't like this character because of, personal connections to me. Like, somebody will do like a long post on why they hate Bakugo because he reminds them of their childhood bullies or whatever.
Yeah.
Now, I think that Bakugo as a character at the start of the story was honestly like kind of a psycho,
Yes.
right? Like, and I think probably more than Horikoshi actually intended. Uh, if I had to guess, though, maybe I'm underestimating Horikoshi, but
I don't
uh,
think so.
I do know that it's like known that Horikoshi did change Bakugo's arc. Like this is part of like the lore of My Hero Academia that he had a different plan, and at some point he like changed his mind and went in a different direction. But Bakugo was like a psycho, right?
Mm.
However, I think that Bakugo is another character of Horikoshi's that was extremely well written. His apology scene to Deku is like a top 3 moment in the entire manga, probably. Uh, it's absolutely it's absolutely awesome. It's extremely satisfying. Uh, and it's because he follows the rules of a good apology, acknowledges wrongdoing, uh, right? Admits admits what he did, gives an apology with no conditions, and then promises to do better in the future. Right? Like that's apologies 101.
Yes.
So it's a very satisfying moment. It's also like the real climax of Bakugo's character arc. Even him defeating One for All, I would argue, is not actually the climax of his arc. It's more like an epilogue. Uh,
Yeah. It's
the
it's
climax
it's
of
seeing
Bakugo's
him
arc.
as the hero he would be.
Right, exactly. But it's just showing you, though, he, like, as far as I'm concerned, he became that hero when he apologized to Deku, which is what he always had to do.
Hmm.
Because their interactions are really interesting because like normally you see Bakugo is like an absolute I would say I was gonna say he's definitely alpha, but I might be wrong. I think so though.
Oh
Is
yeah.
he alpha or sigma?
Alpha.
Yeah, I would think alpha, right?
So like the thing with the Sigma is that there's a certain amount of social I don't care, that exists. Like
No, yeah, he cares too much
he
about the
he he
hierarchy.
totally cares. He cares all the time.
Yeah, he
Uh,
cares too much about the hierarchy.
it's one of those things where it's like, There's, subtle signs and obvious signs, and sure, there's the sign of he doesn't care what the public thinks. He thinks calling himself explosion murder god is cool, but that's just him being a 13-year-old boy, or
Yeah.
however old those guys are.
He
Uh,
cares about his hierarchy among the heroes for
yes.
sure.
Oh yeah.
In fact, like very, very much. So yeah, no, he's alpha. Uh, what's interesting is that normally when you see alphas like get into that really sort of intense bullying, it's generally against gammas,
Yeah.
right? And sometimes, to be fair, and to be totally honest, sometimes it turns people into gamma. So I don't want to like these are children, so the categories don't entirely match up,
Well, I would
right?
say that Midoriya was an omega.
Um, yeah, maybe. Here's the thing, though. Before Bakugo bullied him, he did not seem to be entirely unpopular. Like, he at the very least was able to
Yeah, but
interact with people. One of the satisfying things about the story to me was that when he went to UA, without, like, Bakugo having such a dominant stranglehold on the social situation, with people able to see Deku for who he was, he sort of, like, became popular kind of quickly, and I've seen that happen before, right? Like
yeah,
this
but
happened to people I know, like where they went to a different situation, people saw them outside of like the preset hierarchy, and then they were like, "Wow, this person's actually really cool. I like them." And then they got surprisingly popular.
sure. But like as I'll mention, the hierarchy is fractal. Like it doesn't matter what he is in such and such a place, because when he's going somewhere else, that resets all the social graces. And so even though Bakugo was still his bully, um, a bully of his very own, uh, it didn't mean that the UA people would go around with it as much as the previous class did, because the previous class was all down for bullying Deku,
Yeah,
even if they aren't at UA. They certainly were at whatever piece of crap school they went to.
yeah, it was one of yeah, that was one of the cool things about the story, and it rang very true to me. Like from
Yeah.
my experience in seeing this, that when Deku went to UA, they all kind of saw it because Bakugo was no longer the king of the hill. He couldn't like force his will on everyone to the extent he had at the other school. You know, because
Yep.
there are a lot of very powerful people and a lot of them very powerful personalities, right?
Yep.
At UA who aren't going to be intimidated by Bakugo, and they're willing to look at Midoriya who had to pass the same tests they did, right? So
Mm-hmm.
they're willing to just say, okay, I don't know anything about this kid. What is he like? And then going, wow, actually, he has a lot of good qualities. And this kid. Meanwhile, though, the interesting thing about it is that Bakugo could have become like they could have went the route of making Bakugo an outcast, but they didn't do that either, right?
Yeah.
Like he was sort of rejected, but he found a friend group. He was rejected from being the king of the hill, right?
Yes.
Like they didn't award him top dog, but they didn't like start bullying him or anything. You know,
Yeah.
he found a friend group with Kirishima, uh, and people who understood like that he also had his good qualities. That was one of the things about the story and their interactions with the students that really felt true to life to me. That like I have seen that sort of thing happen, right? Like
Yep.
it's very it felt very real that this is how the social hierarchy would like shape up. It's kind of a shame, I think, that Horikoshi did stop emphasizing the school aspect after a while, uh, because I think he wrote that stuff very well. Uh, like the student interactions and things, I think he did a pretty good job with. I would have liked to see some more of that, but that's not really a criticism so much as just like me personally.
Yeah.
You know, yeah, I think that we've exhausted My Hero Academia for now. For I say this each time we talk about it, but for a long time, people in the chat, this when Ben and I first started, we used to talk about My Hero Academia and JoJo's like every week until one day after a chat, like we stopped, talked to each other, and said like, "Yeah, we're not gonna do this anymore, at least as much." So now we try and keep it like once every few months.
Yeah. And we've got other
Um,
things to talk about in Shonen Jump. Quite
yes.
frankly, I'm interested in talking a lot about Kagurabachi, which has been an absolute darling of mine since it started coming out. Originally, I had, it was like, this is a little bit generic, but then it like started developing, and
Mm.
it's like, oh my, uh, you know, this is pretty good. Like that sort of thing. Like, the recognition as it goes on, it's getting a little bit better and better. And there's these little gags that he just seems to get, the writer seems to get better and better with. Quite frankly, Kagurabachi has the chops to be a long runner in all the best ways. Uh, the story is that the main character's father is murdered for his magical swords. These magical swords are uber powerful, basically capable of fighting wars with them. Uh, and, uh, you know, people want them. There's reasons why, excuse me, I'm being swarmed by bugs. I'll be right back.
Oh
I
no.
gotta get out of here.
I wish I could comment on this, but I actually have not been reading Kagurabuchi.
I
I
feel
keep going back to it.
Kagurabachi. Hey,
Kagurabachi, sorry. I
hurry.
keep going back to it because it keeps getting recommended as like, yeah, this is really good. And I start reading it, and then I forget that I'm in the middle of reading it, and I go, wait, what's going on in this again? And I need to
Aw.
read. Uh, it's sad.
Yep, it is. Uh, so what makes it? So the goal of the main character is to avenge his dad and rediscover the six swords that his dad made, including the secret seventh one that he uses himself to fight. Each sword has special powers, and magicians each have their own special powers that they can use to fight. The main there's a bunch of different villains. Right now, they've got an auction arc going on where the main character gave up his super powerful sword and now uses a half sword from Shoujo, who is the Sojo, who was the first villain, and quite frankly is one of the best anime villains I've seen in a very long time. Um, he had this So like, how do I want to talk about it? So Sojo had this absolutely psychotic way of moving and acting. He had an absolutely psychotic look, where he had his bangs over his eyes all the time, and at the same time he had this like sleepy, wide-eyed kind of look to him that just worked for him. It worked, and it's hard to explain it in like super complex terms. His design worked. He had the N10, which allowed him to do all kinds of crazy lightning strikes and stuff like that, and it um, all these crazy lightning strikes, and he used it to kill off a lot of characters. He tortured another character, to figure out her healing powers. He, had his own organization. He was a yakuza and stuff like, wizard yakuza, and all these other things like that. And it gave him this aura of menace that I honestly haven't seen in many shonen villains. Um, some other things that are going on here in Shoujo Jump. Quite frankly, I don't. I'm only like reading seriously like 3 Sunday sheets and like one of the weekly sheets that is Chainsaw Man. The three reading is Kagurabachi, My Hero Academia, and One Piece, of course. And I'll get to One Piece as well. But Kagurabachi, 28 episodes in, and I'm hooked. I want to know what goes next. it's got this amazing fight choreography because the powers of both Shoujo and Kagurabachi involve disappearing from sight and then slashing at each other at a certain appropriate moment. You'd have these moments where like they'd be there, then they disappear, then they'd be there again, and then they disappear. There's these clashes of swords and lightning and weird black goldfish floating around because that's the main guy's, uh, that's the main guy's sword's power, and they give him these abilities. The villain Shojo evolves in the middle of his fight. Because he's so desperate. He's fighting like 17 federal agents at the same time, and he's not even on PCP. That's crazy. He's fighting seven federal agents, and he's evolving his sword fighting, which they're like, yeah, he shouldn't evolve, but watch out if he starts to do something wacky and you push him to the edge. Like they warn him, and at the same time, he's like, wait a minute, I don't I don't have to be touching my sword to use its power. And he starts absolutely wrecking everybody. It's just a fantastic villain, a fantastic fight scene, uh, and so on and so forth. The character designs, the fight designs are absolutely amazing, and the humor is actually pretty good too. Um, there's this joke where the main character, and his a friend of his is sitting in an elevator. They walk out and they're in a weird room, and so they're like, "Hey, uh, Rock and Stone. Kagurabachi is that special sauce." Oh yeah, and like it's just good. The character designs are good. The humor, like they go into a room and it's clear that it's this one guy who's sitting behind a desk's ability, but he's not the guy they fight. They have to fight this other guy who is a government agent, and the guy's like, "Yeah, my name's Big Cheese or whatever his name is. I'm this, and you're in my power." And they're just ignoring him, carrying on a conversation while he tells people who he is. Uh, there's all kinds of sight gags when it's not being serious. Uh, it's just full of heart in all the best ways. It's my understanding, thanks to J.D. Cohen, that uh, uh, it sold incredibly well in Japan, and it is my understanding that it's been near the top of the Shonen Jump rankings. Actually, let me see if I can find the Shonen Jump rankings.
I think I know where they are.
Isn't it Jajakin? Oh no, it's in the middle, but it's going back up. Whew.
I know that Horikoshi came out publicly and praised the series,
Yeah,
so it's getting some praise from like the old hands. Yeah.
yeah, and it's some of these things like Blue Box. I've never even heard anyone talk about Blue Box. I don't get it.
Reading. So Blue Box is one of those things. It's surprisingly like it's bigger than you think, and it will
Mm,
probably get an anime someday. It's a romance, right? Like it's
mm,
a. So here's the thing that people don't realize in Japan, genre is less important than age group. That it's right than the group it's marketed towards.
mm.
Blue Box reads like a shojo, but is in fact a shonen, right? And you see that with there are a lot of things that are like that. Actually, Ancient Magus Bride is another great example of it is a shonen, right? Like it was published in a shonen magazine, but it's a shojo, right?
Yeah.
Like if you watch it, and I love Ancient Magus Bride. It's great, but like it has that vibe. Blue Box is
Yeah.
sort of like that. Uh,
I didn't know this, but Kagurabachi has been like in the bottom five for a long time, and now it's
I
rising back
wonder
up.
Yeah, I wonder if Horikoshi praising it might have had something to do with that. Actually,
Yeah,
uh, it's a possibility.
because it's
But
weird. Because
yeah,
for some of them, uh, is like, during the chapters during the fight with Sojo, and it's like they were some of the best chapters I've ever, seen in my life. There's these blink and you miss it, these fight scenes that are just, absolutely astounding. Uh, yeah, actually, its first chapter was, I'm pretty sure this is its first chapter. No, hold on. Anyway, point is, I'm absolutely shocked that it was this low during the story arcs that were happening there. Um, Astounded, unhappy, disgusted even. But what's wrong with these people? Uh,
Honestly, it's because it's hard for anything to make it in Shonen Jump. Like Shonen Jump is it is such a brutal environment. Like it is very difficult for anything to succeed in Shonen
yeah,
Jump until you get your hooks in, right?
yeah.
Like until that point, it's just like you don't know.
Like, like I'm looking at it, and then there's these chapters where I don't know, no accounting for taste in these people. Uh,
I think
hopefully,
Blue Box is generic but does its job well, is how I would describe it.
sure. Chihiro Rokuhira. That's the main character's name. Let's see. Where is? There we go. Sojo. I don't know. It just I'm shocked. I really wish it wasn't like that, but you
Yeah,
know,
we've mentioned this before, but it's worth discussing again one day. Like, I don't think that people realize just how popular romance is as a genre, like, outside of the United States, where, like, romance. So, in the United States and Western storytelling generally,
mm,
romance is either A, for women, or B, a subplot in a larger story, right? Like, that's just tends to be how it's used. That is not the case in Japan, where romance stories are actually very, very popular. Like some of them are like wildly popular, like Kaguya-sama, for example, which was the big hit a few years ago, and is still, still pretty well known. The anime's still going. Uh, Kaguya-sama Love is War, like, was shattering records, right? Like people do not realize like just how popular romance is in other parts of the world outside of the West. This idea where this idea that romance is like something that is not for men, I'm not sure how that arose the
yeah,
way that it did in the West, but that assumption is absolutely not shared by Japan. Now, that's not to say that male and female romances follow the same tropes. They definitely don't,
mm,
right? But romance is not looked at as something for women. Like one of my all-time favorite series is the romance series Toradora, which I've always been a big fan of, and there's absolutely nothing special about it except for the fact that it's really well written.
yeah,
Like it's just a standard romance. It's two people in high school who meet and form a relationship, and there's some soap opera-ish elements, but the writing in it is very, very good. Uh, I love Toradora, but like Kaguya-sama is good. I wonder, and it makes me think of like, how did that happen? I wonder how the separation occurred in the West, but that's a discussion maybe for another day.
yeah. And it's like JD Cohen said, Kagurabachi is selling very well in the volume format. As for romance, um, so here's the thing: like I've read plenty of pulps and plenty of science fictions. Uh, there's plenty of romance in those. It's just kind of gamma. Or it's very kind of
Ooh.
one-sided on the male fantasy, which is perfectly acceptable. The thing is that one, uh, the art that a society enjoys is a representation of that society. It has no virtue in and of itself. Even though the Japanese love the romances, quite frankly, most of them are either sexual gratification romances, no different from, some nubile Frank Frazetta woman on the cover of a Conan book, though nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that, but there is something wrong with
Yes,
the
there is.
harems. Uh,
Uh,
yes, I know. Uh, it's just that my addiction's better than their addictions. That's all I'm saying. Don't you know? Don't you know that it's all subjective? Come on, Anthony. Take
so
the subjective pill.
I will
Uh,
say this though. Oh, finish
no,
your
hold
thought
on. I
first,
was
and then I'll
finishing
talk.
my thought. I was joking with that stuff. But with the harem stuff, and then you also have more traditional romances where it's like one guy, one girl, and a whole bunch of adventures. Some harems do it right. Like My Bride is a Mermaid is absolutely one of my favorite, like romance focused ones. But it's also like absolutely funny comedy that is genuinely funny. They've got a guy called Shark Fujishira who's a gym teacher and also an under the sea yakuza, and he keeps trying to eat people, including the main character. And when he transforms into a mermaid, he doesn't transform into a half man, half fish. He just transforms into a shark on legs. That's gold. 10 out of 10. You know, it's great.
That
It's
is pretty funny.
funny. It's a sight gag every time. There's another of the yakuza from under the sea is an octopus, and he's just an octopus, and nobody comments on it. He's like the art teacher or something like that. He hangs half out of the classroom because he's a giant octopus. Nobody notices. Uh, you got to keep undercover, don't you know? So you have stuff like that, and then you have like stuff that, quite frankly, were never healthy to have because they were essentially softcore porn or just sick romances. What's the one? There was one series where like the main girl eventually just disappeared from her own story, except in group shots, because there was always a new girl of the story arc that had to be focused on to sell merch. There was other shows like HXH, um, and just tons of others. But to me, that's incredibly unhealthy. Then you have things like where there's just like the one main character. Quite frankly, harems work best if there's one main character, and then one main couple, I should say, and then there's other couples around them. Hunter x Hunter does that pretty well, uh, is my
Not
understanding.
Hunter.
Not Hunter x Hunter.
HX.
Sorry, no, no,
Yeah,
no, no. HXH was its own thing. There is an anime called HXH.
I know. It made me think of Hunter x Hunter. It's like, no, no, that's definitely not a harem.
Not Hunter x Hunter. Sorry, I meant My Hero Academia has a pretty good one between Deku and Aravity. I think that it is an absolutely fantastic little romance, and I think it does well because it
Yeah, I
handles the
agree.
story arc that it needs to handle. And quite frankly, the only answer for Toga Himiko that wasn't, a woman fight over love was shooting her in the head because she's psycho, and there's no solution for it. There's no amount of BPD medication that can cure this woman. Uh, it's whether brought on by society or brought on by her own manic tendencies.
I'll
Who
also
knows?
say too, uh, all of the romances in Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood are great.
Yep.
Uh, and the one frustration I have with the otherwise 10 of 10 finale, one of the most satisfying finales of any show ever, is that when Ed gives his big love confession to Winry and Winry responds, that they don't kiss. It drives me nuts every time I watch it. He like brings her in for a hug, and if I sound like way too invested in this, it's because I am.
Yes.
Uh, because Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood is easily and by far my favorite anime, and probably my favorite show, and like a top three work of fiction uh, that I've ever consumed. I adore Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood. That moment in the finale has always annoyed me, just because like it's so obviously a part of the story where he should pull Winry in for a kiss, and they don't do it,
Mm.
and I'm just like, but why? and I know why. It's because of, like, Japanese tropes or whatever. Um, with that said, it's a fantastic romance. All of the romances in it are great. Alan May are a great match. I love. They're good together.
There,
Uh,
there was a pretty good like little known romance that I liked in Samurai Usagi. No, not Samurai Usagi. Rapid Samurai? It wasn't the famous one that you might be thinking of. It lasted for like 30 chapters, and it was about this samurai, poor samurai who gets a wife and she loves him and stuff. It's pretty cute and wholesome, and some great sword fights. That was a pretty good romance. But point is, uh, what are we even talking about, Anthony?
you know what? We go off track. I just brought up romances as something that would be worth talking about later, and you were saying that Japanese romances could be unhealthy. However, I will say this is where I was going to respond. If you read Blue Box, which I have, I'm not quite caught up with it because I stopped reading it because I realized I was bored. Uh, but there's really nothing wrong with the romance in Blue Box. So it's very anime, if that makes sense. And you who have consumed a lot know what I mean.
Hmm.
Uh, so the premise is that the main girl, whose name I can't remember off the top of my head, uh, she is a basketball player who wants to make nationals and is in her last year of high school. And she moves in with main boy's family because her family goes overseas or something, but she wants to stay in Japan for a shot at nationals. And
Hmm.
main boy is a badminton player who has a huge crush on her. And that's it. That's the story. Like, and he wants to go to nationals too. I have successfully described for you the plot. Uh, Now, there is nothing wrong. Like, as far as the romance goes, it's actually, like, pretty wholesome. There's lots of, like, cute moments, if you know what I'm referring
Yes.
to, right? Like, lots of cute little moments when they actually do eventually get together, which was a little bit surprising because normally you save that to the end. Uh, but I think ever since in more recent times, more and more stories are quote unquote subverting it, and it's no longer really a subversion, you know, that sort of thing. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but they do a good job with it. Like, it's fine. It just realized it's like what I read through like 100 some chapters of it, and I was like, why am I still following this? Like, the main couple is together. I don't really care. And then the 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 main boy doesn't. There isn't that much personality to the main boy in except insofar as, like, he's fine. You know, he is a perfectly fine character. Uh, Main girl is very likable, and I think the reason that it does so well is that it's very well drawn. And main girl is very popular, right? So people became very invested in the romantic relationship between the two leads. Is, I think, what happened. But, like, that's a very wholesome romance, and it's actually very, very popular. Like, it's more popular than you realize. Like you said, you never heard of it, and true, I wouldn't have either. But when you look at, like, every poll, it always does well. Uh, Blue Box, like, it's always near the top of the list. It will probably get an anime one day. It's just a matter of when. Uh, Kaguya-sama, again, extraordinarily popular, was like record breaking. Uh, and Kaguya-sama Love is War, I don't think is particularly perverted. Uh, I do think it's a bit of a shame because in the first half of the series, they have a very wholesome romance, and I have started to call out more recently when characters fornicate, and they do fornicate. Uh, at one point, like, eventually when they get together, and granted, of course they do. They don't have a Christian society and have no moral standing to not, right? Like, it's just there is no reason that they wouldn't. But let us never forget that that is wicked. Like,
Mm.
we need to make sure that our moral sense isn't dulled here.
Right.
Is my point, right? Like, I understand that this was not that it wasn't it's not entirely fair to expect them to do better than this because they don't have the Christian background. But the flip side is fornication is not immoral just because of Christianity. It's immoral per se. and we shouldn't be dulled to the fact that what they're doing is wicked. Uh, so I will criticize it on that ground, but ultimately I think it's a pretty good story. Uh, yeah, the last thing. So, oh, and Merg Max says Kaguya-sama is seinen. I did not realize that actually. I genuinely thought it was shonen. Interesting. Which is why they got away with some of the later chapters. Interesting. But makes sense. Yeah, revolt against the modern world, Anthony. Now, John C. Wright has been talking about this for a while, and on reflection, and somewhat to the annoyance of my family, who doesn't want to hear it from me all the time, uh, but on reflection, I think he is ultimately right that we need to make sure that like we're not dulled to the immorality of this stuff, right?
Yep.
Like,
Because it hurts the ability to make a moral judgment both for yourself and to put God's law above all. Like I've found myself, in moments of loss of objectivity, basically forgetting that God's law is above all law.
right,
And it will be, of course, judged upon. Our actions will be judged through that law at the end of time, or you know, at the appropriate time. We'll say that's
exactly.
probably more accurate. With to bring it back more to our subject, um, I'm kind of glad that, well, things are the way they are because partially, there isn't a lot really for me to enjoy. Uh, and looking at like the Shonen Jump tracker, um, some of the things I really don't enjoy uh, can disappear and maybe be replaced by something I'll actually enjoy. Things like Mama Yu Yu. I don't like it. I don't like that manga. Wait a minute. I think it's done. Hold on.
What?
Mama Yu Yu.
I don't even know what that is. So
Yes, it's over. It's over.
I'm gonna answer Merg Max's question. Off topic, does someone need to be conservative to be or make superversive material? So leaving aside problems with terminology, like you'll get, like the Vox Day, like, oh, we're, conservatives fail to conserve anything or whatever, but I get what you mean, right? Like, do you need to be on that side of the spectrum, whatever, right? Yeah, yeah, yeah. So the answer is no. You don't need to profess that yourself because the muse can overcome you. However,
Yep.
ultimately, all good art is going to reflect it to some extent, especially, or at least all superversive, especially, right? Like,
Yes.
Miyazaki was famously a communist up until the 90s, right? And even then, like, he never entirely lost his sympathies with it.
Mm.
Uh, Now, I think that that is profoundly wrong. I don't agree with him, right? Like even allowing for like Japan's different political environment, whatever. I still don't think it's right.
I'm sorry. Did
Uh,
I think I might have blanked out for a second. What are we talking about?
Murgamago Remaxis asks, does someone need to be conservative to be or make superversive material?
Right.
So yeah, I was saying that Miyazaki is a good example of this.
Oh, okay. There we
Miyazaki,
go.
so because Miyazaki was a communist up until the 90s, he did eventually like leave that behind. So he claimed, but you could see it in bits of like Castle in the Sky, for example. He based it on like the town in Castle in the Sky is based off a Welsh mining town. You could see like socialist posters in the background.
Yep.
Uh, it's not a huge part of the movie, and if it was, it would have been a mistake. But it's there, you know.
Hmm.
Like, and I fundamentally don't agree with Miyazaki about this, right? I think he's straight out wrong and dangerously wrong. Like, I think that that philosophy is warped in a very profound way. Uh, with that said, I think that it doesn't mean the if you're creating superversive art, ultimately true beauty is right, real beauty is going to be true in some real sense, right?
Hmm.
So the muse might overcome you and you might make art that reflects a higher truth than you yourself realize or acknowledge, and that happens a lot.
Yes.
Miyazaki is a great example of this. I think that this is what's going on with him. um I think that in his movies, sometimes values, ideas, whatever, are expressed that he himself would not openly express,
Yes.
right, or agree with, but that he recognizes are necessary for the needs of the story, as any true artist will, because they follow the muse. Miyazaki's muse is an angel. Uh, right? His muse
Mm.
is not his muse is not a devil. China Miéville, for example, his muse might be a devil, even though he is a brilliant writer. Uh,
It might be.
but not Miyazaki's.
And there's like different gradients of that. Like if you compare China Mielville to Dan Simmons, it's clear that Dan Simmons has a devil that's closer to an antichrist, whereas China Mielville just produces, I wouldn't say evil works, but because I did read John C. Wright's review of
Perdido
paragraph
Street
of
Station.
Perdido Street Station, which I actually enjoyed. Um,
Yeah,
like
Vox also did.
the
I'm sure it's good.
yeah, like the best China Melville book, by the way, is The City and the City, because it is absolutely mind bending, but makes perfect logical sense. Um, yeah, no, it's just I would recommend The City and the City. It's a detective novel with uh, a pretty insane ending that is like the it's so crazy that I don't even think they could make it into a movie, even if they had like an unlimited budget. Like, how do you even? It's I can't even like talk about it without spoiling some of it, and in a big way too. Like, just that's how wacky it is. Like, just imagine two cities superimposed on each other, and that's the whole thing. Like, it's two cities on top of each other, and I don't mean on top of each other like one's in a cave underneath the other one. I mean they're literally involved in the same space. It is wild. It is wacky. It is an idea that is almost intoxicating just how complex it is. And the fact is he pulls it off perfectly is something that just astounds me to this day. Um, I think that there's gradients of it. There's plenty of Christians who wrote stuff, but they never really had the muse in them in the same way that others have. But some, who like Dan Simmons, who explicitly made an antichrist, uh, who is I'm talking about Hyperion, the girl in Hyperion, the girl, the kid, the annoying little brat. Like it's hard to even talk about it because Hyperion and Hyperion the sequel are absolutely fantastic books. Hyperion is well known for a reason. Uh, it's Canterbury Tales in space with all kinds of crazy stuff. But the Antichrist they have in there is another level. It's almost anti-inspiration. It's anti-muse with how she acts and how special she's treated and all these other things. And I just hate this character. Both because I can tell that they're making a mockery of Christ, and also because it's like, well, how do you mean? Okay, well, here's an example. When she was a kid, she was part of an architect's group. The thing is that the architect was notoriously cantankerous, and you couldn't get close to him. So what does she do? He holds a fancy dress party, and she shows up in men's clothing, and pretends not to notice anybody. Which is all kinds of bullshit. It is performative bullshit. Any artist can tell you that that is performative bullshit. There's an example in Bronze Age Mindset where the Bronze Age pervert's at a party, and I can't remember if it's him or somebody else. I don't remember. It doesn't matter. Where these people came in and they were immaculately dressed. They had the right setup, the right attitude, and then the cameraman's like, "Hey, wait, that was pretty cool. Let me take a picture of it." And so the thing is, they instead of saying, screw off, uh, they went and took a picture of it, and it took them like 3 or 4 times. And so by the end of it, nobody gave a crap about them. It's that sort of thing. Performative nonsense. And what it feels like, in talking about this, that this chick was being set up so it's like she's going to the temple. Because the Hyperion Cantos worships the artists of the past, and worships what they meant and what they created, and how they interact with the world, to the point where they're resurrected in the next life in a new earth to do their thing. It's like Jesus going before the high priests when he was like 12 years old. You remember that story? I'm sure you do.
I never read Hyperion.
What? No, I'm talking about the Bible, where Jesus goes before the priests and astounds them with his teaching when he's like 12. And then Mary leaves him behind by accident because they thought he was with his family.
Oh, yes, I do remember the Bible.
Thank you. It's a mimicry of that story, right? How does she the since the religion of the actual religious practices of the Hyperion Cantos is aimed towards art and inspiration, the muse, and not necessarily to real spiritual power and being. Her impressing this ancient crotchety reincarnated artist is much more is of the same genre as Jesus impressing the priests at the temple. Like, it's obvious, even including her sacrifice, and which I couldn't even finish like that. I just left the book. I'm like, I don't know what's going on with this. I don't care. This is all dumb. I hate it. All right, that is like whatever Dan Simmons had in the first Hyperion book and kind of in the second is completely and totally gone by the fourth book in the Hyperion Cantos. And it's even turned to sour milk because I can't even think about this stuff without thinking about how disgusting I find some of the things that are done before, because it's a mockery of my God. It is blasphemous. Like, you have to understand, when it comes to muses, there's a gradient. China Mielville might have a devil for a muse, but quite frankly, that devil knows good literature and keeps to very strict quality controls. Whereas when it's clear that when Dan Simmons got his fame and glory, his devil turned on him and made a Mary Sue and a false Christ. Uh, and I can't stand it. I hate it. I absolutely hate this sort of nonsense, because it's clear that whatever the intention of the story is, whatever the clever words and the cool things in it, and there are plenty of cool things in the Hyperion Cantos, in the end it submitted to a false idea of Christ that was a precocious little girl who was wiser than her years. Goodness me, where have I heard that before? Uh, and quite frankly, I think there's a reason why Dan Simmons doesn't really enter into the halls of the Grandmasters. Nobody seems to mention him or the books he writes, and when I see them, nobody seems excited about them. It's maybe I'm not in the right places. I do avoid fandoms like the plague, but it's very much like I think he's got a devil for a muse, and an antichrist besides. But that's neither here nor there for Shonen Jump. But I hope that answers your question. Uh, there's there's a lot more to it than just some sort of like, what's your politics? Well, what's the source of your inspiration? Uh,
Yeah.
For me, it's like I'm always looking for a holy source of inspiration. I am not looking to source my inspiration from things that are not themselves also inspired by God, and I'm not looking to inspire myself from the things of this world. The things of this world are ugly, small-souled, hedonistic, and oftentimes set for destruction in ways that the author cannot comprehend it. There's
Yeah,
a
I'll also say too, by the way, that our admiration of Miyazaki, there is a right wing contingent that is like absolutely convinced that Miyazaki is some kind of like subversive radical and we shouldn't be watching him. You know,
Yep.
this is a very real and surprisingly large like right wing contingent that does not respect and does not think that we should be watching Miyazaki. And I will say that I do take such people like seriously.
Yes.
right? Like, I hear them out. I don't agree. Uh, I think they're wrong ultimately, but I don't hear it and go, no, that's ridiculous. Like, we
Mm.
all have blind spots, right?
Right.
There's always going to be something that we like and we want to make excuses for that objectively or is probably going to harmful in some way. It's possible Miyazaki could be that blind spot. I don't think he is, but that's because when people tell me like, "Hey, you should really consider this," like I do it. I remember getting into years and years ago when I was writing on the Castalia House blog. Somebody mentioned this about Princess Mononoke. They said like Princess Mononoke is feminist, environmentalist garbage or whatever, and I basically told him like I completely disagree and think you're totally wrong. And he got very offended by me saying this.
Yep.
And because I basically told him that, like, look, I completely disagree with you. I think that's a total misinterpretation of the story, which I absolutely do, by the way, and I would stand by that to this day. Uh,
Mm.
but he responded like he was very offended that I responded in that way because I dismissed him by basically telling him like, if you want to know my thoughts on it, I wrote a review. There's a link. And then he's like, "Are you serious?" And I said, "All right. Imagine if somebody came in and they said like, I would read a Princess of Mars, but it's sexist, chauvinistic, and it's really just for children. It's not worth reading for adults." Now, you could write a whole response, or you could say, "Here are some links to some resources where I already talked about it and analyze some of the serious stuff, right? Like some of the serious aspects of the story that make it worth reading in the modern day,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's like this is the equivalent of what you just did because I completely disagree with everything you said and I've already addressed a lot of it. I'm not going to like waste time in a comment section on it. If you still disagree, that's too bad.
Yep.
You know. Uh but yeah, I do hear people out who say that though. Like it's something that go, okay, am I just making excuses for it? Right? I don't think I am, but it's worth considering. Star Trek, on the other hand, that's one where I am convinced that Star Trek lovers like you are making excuses for it.
Yeah.
Right? You grew up with it. I have said this to people, and some of them who are people I highly respect. Gene Roddenberry was not your friend. To say, oh, he would
Mm-hmm.
have been against modern day Star Trek or whatever, like maybe, maybe not, but politically he was right in line with them.
Yep.
Uh, and some of the worst writing in all of Star Trek comes from early Next Generation, which was the one that was controlled the most by Roddenberry.
He
Uh,
would have no problem with all the pride BS that Star Trek gets up to now. He would have no
yep,
problem, and in fact would encourage it.
yep, exactly. And if you like, don't get me wrong, I think there are individual good episodes of Star Trek. I think Wrath of Khan is a masterpiece. Uh, but to be frank, there is a reason that Gene Roddenberry hated Wrath of Khan. Uh, he hated Wrath of Khan because Wrath of Khan was a Christian parable. It absolutely is. The parallels are so strong and so striking, they cannot be accidental. Uh, Wrath of Khan is an extremely Christian story. It is also by far the best Star Trek movie. Uh, Wrath of Khan is so good that I tend to tell people I'm not even really a Star Trek fan. I'm a Wrath of Khan fan.
Hmm.
Like it is so good on its own. Like there are people who go like I just don't like Star Trek, and I tell them no, really, really, you need to watch Wrath of Khan. Like you don't know. Like I agree with you. Like people criticize it for like I don't like the intellectual stuff. I don't. I think it looks kind of silly. Whatever, right? And go. All of those are
Mm-hmm.
completely valid complaints, and none of them are true. In the case of Wrath of Khan, it's that good. Uh,
Yep.
like it almost feels like a different franchise. It's so good. Uh, but that's neither here and not different. Like it feels like Star Trek. Don't get me wrong, but I mean like the quality is so good. It's like wait, the same people who put out all of this terrible stuff also put out this movie. Uh, and the answer is no. It wasn't the same people. The good team came in for Wrath of Khan. Uh, but whatever. And Galaxy Quest is best track. Yeah, it's great. I love Galaxy Quest. Awesome movie. Uh, I wanted to talk about one more thing before we ended for the night, which was Spy Family. So,
Hmm.
like you, I'm not reading a ton Shonen Jump. I don't know if I don't think this really means much in terms of like the health of the magazine. I mean, honestly,
It doesn't mean anything,
yeah.
as long as it sells. Like, it's one of those things where I absolutely dislike uh, pretty much everything underneath Kagurabachi. So, like, the most recent one for issue 19 has Kagurabachi at number 10. Underneath it, just below Yuzakura family. But underneath it is Witch Watch, Elusive Samurai, Super Psychic Policeman Chojo, News Exorcist, Me and Robokoko, Green Green Greens, Deer and Enemy. Which, by the way, there's been a lot of plant-based horror recently, and by that I mean there's two at the same time, and that's weird. And Deer and Enemy, and that's Wild Strawberry and Deer and Enemy. Two on Ice.
And this is not in Shonen Jump, but also Shibatorian.
That's true. Shibatorian. Shibatorian's very good though. Ooh,
It's not Shonen Jump though.
ooh.
Shibatorian's great.
Shibatorian's great.
Uh,
But like, and then Shadow Eliminators and Mama Yu Yu, which just had its last chapter. Thank goodness. Mama Yu Yu had one good thing going for it, is that its enemy art was crazy and over the top. But quite frankly, its story was absolute garbage, and I hated it. Um, it did not
hmm,
do anything right, and I just couldn't stand to read it past like chapter 3.
yeah. Uh, Agreed. But yeah, the last thing that I wanted to say about Shonen Jump is talk about Spy Family a bit.
Mm-hmm.
So Spy Family has been running for a while. It has an anime. There's a movie coming out later this month. We've talked about it in the past. I think Spy Family is the most consistently good thing in Shonen Jump. Like, so I have kind of revised my opinion on the matter of like, can a work of fiction be perfect? People and formerly I would have been agreed because people will sometimes use this as a crutch. Like, well, no fiction, nothing is perfect,
Like,
right? But yeah, but I've come around to the idea of like, no, actually, I think that you can perfectly execute what you're trying to do, right?
mm-hmm.
Like, I've sort of changed my mind. It's like, are there such a thing as perfect works of fiction? Functionally, yes, right? Like, where the things that you might call quote unquote mistakes don't really matter, you know,
Mm.
for in the grand scheme of things. They're either so minor or irrelevant to the main idea of the work. And I think I would put Spy Family in this category. But I would put a fair amount of fiction in this category, to be fair. Uh, like I would put original Star Wars, for example, as in a New Hope Star Wars, you know, and Empire Strikes Back. I would put in this category of functionally perfect, you know, things like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like they do exactly what they intend to do. They do not make any errors that would detract from the experience they are trying to create. Uh, I would put Spy Family in this category. Uh, it pretty much it promised you a certain thing in the opening chapters. Knew exactly what it wanted to be, and it has delivered on everything that it's promised just about flawlessly. So
Mm.
the premise of the story, for those who don't know, is that a spy who we know only by the code name of Twilight is given a new mission. He needs to infiltrate an elite prep school in order to prevent a mysterious like weapons manufacturer or maybe like the head of the war department. I can't remember this exact detail of why it matters who he was, but he needs to infiltrate this prep school to get into a meeting of imperial scholars, the top scholars at the school, so that he can get unprecedented inner access to the like head of the war department or whatever of the enemy nation in order to prevent a war from breaking out. The only way for him to do this is to adopt a young waif from an orphanage, enroll her or him in Eden Academy, the elite prep school, and have her become an imperial scholar so he can get invited to that cushy meeting. But in order to get into the prep school, they only accept people with equally illustrious families. So people who have no people who have spotless records. So he needs to have a wife. So he needs to marry someone. And the wife he finds, he thinks that she's just a city hall worker who wants to enter into a sham marriage with him so that she can fool her brother. But in fact, the woman is actually using this as cover for an assassin job. She works for a secret assassination organization called the Garden. And the child that they adopt is a little girl named Anya, who, unbeknownst to everyone else in the story, can read minds. So they believe that Anya has no idea what's going on with any of this, when in fact she is the only character in the story who knows everyone's secrets at any time. They eventually adopt a dog who can who can tell the future, which pairs very well with Anya's mind reading ability. Uh, this is a brilliant premise for a variety of reasons. Uh, you could probably tell the storytelling potential is unreal, and it has delivered. There's been exciting action. There's been some great slice of life, school life drama with Anya. Uh, there's been political intrigue. It's basically done everything you would want the series to do, and it's done it just about as well as you really realistically could do it. So yeah, I would put it in that category of functionally perfect in terms of it set out to do a specific thing and it did it. Or it is doing it because it's still in the middle of the story. It could still fumble the ending, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that's a possibility. However, it's hard for me to believe that it will. Uh, Generally, what I want to talk about is Spy Family is, in my opinion, though it will get criticism from people, it's actually a very well paced series. And what I mean by that is, first off, when I first read the premise for Spy Family, I thought, okay, so Anya, who's the little girl, she needs to become an Imperial Scholar, which involves her earning 8 Stella Stars, which are like their, merit badges, right? I thought this was a story that might go into like the teenage years of Anya, right? But at the rate she's earning the merit badges, people who will complain that the story moves too slowly, at this point, by the way that it's paced, it's going to end by the time Anya's in first or second grade, right?
Mm.
So actually, it's moving fairly fast, all things considered. Now, the author can slow it down whenever he wants to. That's one of the benefits of the story, right? The sort of story is he can slow it down or speed it up at whatever pace he wants, but generally speaking, it's moving pretty quickly. The other thing too is I think people misunderstand what the story is about. Where what I mean is, what is the main plot of Spy Family? Right? Like if you were to go to someone like, what is the story? What is the plot of the story? They would say the plot of the story is that Anya needs to earn her 8 Stella Stars so that Lloyd can infiltrate the meeting of Imperial scholars and get access to Damien Doss. Or Desmond Doss, sorry. Damien is another character in the story.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so he can get access to Desmond Doss. That's the main plot of Spy Family, right? What that means is that the supposed slice of life stuff that happens when Anya is in school, like, that are things like Lloyd has a plan B, which is Anya becomes friends with Damien. And of course, like any good writer, they get off on the wrong foot when Anya punches Damien in the face. Now, uh, this is what I would have done, right? Like 100%. This is what I would have done. Like it's important that Damien and Anya become friends, so naturally their first meeting can't go well, right? To add drama to the story. Uh, like when you think of the main plot as what they call Operation Strix, that's the name of this whole thing to make Anya an Imperial Scholar and to become friends with Damien, you realize that the thing that progresses the story the most are the stories that take place in the school with Anya in Eden Academy, right? Like, these are the things that progress the story towards that ultimate end goal. And yet, you will see, it is like clockwork. Every time we go to a story that is set in Eden Academy, fans will complain the story is stalling out, right? Why are they spending so much time on filler? Which is really like, and I think this is a fundamental misunderstanding of the story, because these are actually the parts of the story that most obviously and directly progress the main plot, are the slice of life chapters, which is kind of the genius of Spy Family and its pacing, right? The genius of Spy Family's pacing is that he could spend time on things like Anya makes friends,
Hmm.
Anya needs to study for a test. And these will
Anya
have direct.
needs to figure out how to defuse the hostage situation on the school field trip, or else they're all going to die.
Yeah, and this was a real chapter. Uh, was good too. Anyway, like all of these things though, like these basic stuff of like Anya needs to make friends, Anya needs to pick a dress or whatever, right? These actually directly progress the story, right? Like they
Yes.
directly lead to the fundamental solving of the main plot points. In fact, I would argue that if you wanted to call any chapters filler chapters, the filler chapters are the things that focus on Lloyd and Yor, who's the mother, the assassin, that focus on Lloyd and Yor separate from Anya. Like, if Anya's not involved in the story, this is, for all intents and purposes, filler.
Hmm.
Like, it's not progressing the main plot. Now, that doesn't mean it's not important filler. That doesn't mean it's not good, right? But nevertheless, like they pretty recently just got through a whole plot line where there was a rival spy who, if he managed to escape the custody of Lloyd's of Twilight spy organization, right? Lloyd is his fake family name. Uh, if he manages to escape Twilight spy organization and get back to his organization, then their entire operation could be compromised. So they drop everything to stop the spy, right? And it's a major plot, and it's like an arc for a while, right? I would argue that this is actually a filler plot. But what I mean by that is, let's say this never took place in the story. What would change about Lloyd's overall what would change about Operation Strix? It would not be progressed at all. It would not be delayed at all, right? If this plot line were removed from the story, and yet nobody ever complains that this is filler, right? Like, and I think that's because they're misunderstanding what Spy Family is. It's capable of doing all these different stories. It could do action spy stuff. It could do, it spends an arc once where they go on a cruise trip while Yor has an assassination job, and they have like this exciting, assassination plot line involving Yor that's really entertaining. Or it could do basic slice of life stuff. Honestly, my two favorite chapters in the series involve Anya. Uh, one of them, this is the other thing too, is that Spy Family will often use like common Japanese tropes I generally don't find funny, and they will put a twist on them that to me makes them absolutely hilarious. One of them is that like Yor's brother Yori is obsessed with her to the point of absolute like it's creepy, and it's clearly like pseudo incestuous. Uh, Now, normally when you have brother sister complexes, I hate it because I don't really like. This is a joke that's very common in Japan that makes me think that people must relate to it on some level, and I don't relate to it at all. I find it disturbing,
That's
right?
because their society is falling apart such that the only female attention they receive is their own mothers and sisters.
You're absolutely correct, but yeah. Like I don't find it relatable at all. I find it weird and creepy, right?
It's
But
not
this is a
relatable.
very no. But it's a very, very common trope in Japanese media. In Spy Family, when they do it, I've always found it absolutely hilarious. And I think that the reason that I do is that Yor herself seems to be completely oblivious to the fact that her brother clearly has like a sister complex for her. Uh, and also, like, his interactions with Lloyd are always very funny because Lloyd, of course, is pretending to be her husband. So he's like trying to navigate the fact that he is creepily obsessed with Yor, with the fact that technically speaking, he is married to her. And I say technically speaking because, obviously they're not actually married, but nobody else is supposed to know that. Their interactions are always really funny to me. Uh, I think it works very well. Another storyline that I thought, like, this is probably my favorite chapter in the series because it's the funniest chapter in the series. Anya has a best friend named Becky who is like rich. Her father runs a weapons company, I believe. But so and Lloyd encourages the friendship because hey, any connection we can get, right? Uh, so she comes to visit Anya at her home, and she has a crush on Lloyd. So Twilight, you know, and they make it that Becky is a big fan of like some sort of extremely corny romance show. So all her ideas about romance she gets from this extremely corny like romance soap opera that is clearly too old for her and that Anya doesn't watch. So she decides that when she visits Anya's house, she's going to use the skills she learned from the romance show to win over Lloyd. Uh, and initially, Anya sees this and it's like, because remember, Anya can read minds. And she goes, uh-oh, should I put a stop to this? Then she reads her mind and realizes that she has a personal chef. Uh, and then she goes, you know what? Maybe I'll help. And first off, that is a 10 of 10 joke. It's very funny. And second, the reason that all of this works is that while Becky is doing all of this stuff to quote unquote win over Lloyd, Lloyd is literally oblivious at everything that is going on. Like at one point, he's leaning in and talking to Becky and being nice, and she's like, Lloyd is interested in me. I knew it. And then they show what Lloyd's thinking, and he's like, yes, I probably should get into the family's good graces for the mission. Yeah, like maybe she'll know something about weapons. I want her father to like me. She's like, yes, Lloyd is showing interest in me. So finally, when she realizes that nothing is working and Lloyd appears to actually like Yor, she decides to do her ultimate move, which is in soap operas, it always works when ladies swoon and pass out, and then the men rush over and care for them. But when she passes out, it's at dinner with all of them, and she fake passes out, and Yor freaks out, thinking that she accidentally put alcohol in the meal, because she was using it in like the sauce, Uh, so she thinks that somehow alcohol got into the meal, and she fainted due to alcohol poisoning. So she picks her up and like football carries her to the hospital. Uh, the whole thing is extremely funny. Uh, it's just a great chapter, 10 of 10, very funny. The other goat chapter is another Anya chapter, which is one of the very recent chapters, and it's they had a school dance, and of course, the implication at this point is that Damien, who is the son of the guy who Lloyd is trying to win over, he's who's the whole operation is based on, Damien Doss. He clearly has a crush on Anya, but he doesn't want to admit it because they're like 5, so they're all very immature, uh, or like 6-year-olds, whatever. Anyway, so they're all very immature, and Anya doesn't really have a crush on Damien exactly, but she wants to be his friend because she knows that, for whatever reason, Anya is aware that somehow her becoming friends with Damien will aid the will aid the securing of world peace. Right? She knows from reading Lloyd's mind. So she wants to become Damien's friend, but Damien is doing the whole like I even like you, Baka. Uh right, that whole thing, which, again makes sense cuz they're 6. So, but Damien's father is very influential. So all of the girls in the class want to dance with Damien. And not because, like, it would be creepy since they're all 6. They don't all have a crush on him. But all of their parents have the same idea in mind of, hey, you should get close to Damien because his father is an extremely influential person. So they organize a series of contests that are like athletic contests that Anya needs to win in order to dance with Damien. And the big twist at the end of it is that Damien compliments her family, which causes Anya to tell him that she can read minds. And he is the first person in the series that Anya has revealed this to. So it's a great chapter, a lot of twists and turns. Again, this is a sort of thing, though. My point with all of this is that this is the sort of thing that people would complain is a filler chapter, when in fact it actually progressed the story more than any other chapter that has been released so far. The movie's coming out near the end of April. I am looking forward to it. Uh, I'm pretty sure it's just a filler movie, but yeah, whatever. Who cares? Most movies are filler. Most anime movies are going to be filler movies. Just how it works. My Hero Academias are, even though they pretend they aren't, which I think is like the worst of both worlds. I honestly would prefer if My Hero Academia stopped pretending that the movies actually happened. like there is no chance in no universe did like all of the students get sent in My Hero Academia get sent to a private island where they had to take on like a Shigaraki level threat on their own. Uh yeah. So anyway, Spy Family, great manga. It's ongoing. I highly recommend it. Uh Also, I really love the ending theme to season 1, which is a song called Comedy. I find it very wholesome. That's apropos of nothing. I just thought I'd mention it.
Yeah.
Anything to add, Ben?
Nah.
Cool. One last thing then. I do want to make an announcement. So I'm gonna announce one of our confirmed guests, and I will announce it because he like verbally agreed. So he actually agreed to be on the show. But otherwise, I wouldn't announce it. Like he said he would do it. However, it will be a while. This is actually a really cool announcement. Like we have a pretty big guest coming on. Father Gregory Pine. So, Father Pine, for those who don't know, he has his own show on. He's a part of a podcast called Godsplaining. He also has a Saturday show on Pints with Aquinas where he talks about various topics. He's a Dominican friar who works at the Dominican House of Studies in Washington. Uh, One of the most intelligent man I think that I've ever watched or listened to. He's done interviews with Matt Fradd a few different times on Pints with Aquinas. They're all worth watching, and you could kind of tell when you listen to him that he is like 3 steps ahead of his mouth. Like his brain is 3 steps ahead of his mouth, and he's trying to catch up. Incredibly intelligent, erudite, smart man. I've met him once before. I went on a retreat, and he was one of the people who was leading the retreat, and I found him to be just as interesting of a person to speak to in person as he is to listen to online. And happily, he has agreed to appear on our show. That's right. Father Gregory Pine will be appearing on the Superversive live stream. But this is the unfortunate side of things, somewhat. Not for a while. He's going to be busy because this is the Easter season, so we're not going to actually be seeing him until August. Tentatively, the date scheduled for Father Pine's appearance is August 18th, but that is somewhat subject to change because it's so far in the future. Nevertheless, he did agree to do it. He said he would be happy to. Uh, he just wanted us to wait till August so that he could get done whatever he's doing right now, which is, it's the Easter season going into Pentecost, and then he'll be traveling, so lots of things going on. But yeah, uh, I am very excited about this. Father Pine is one of the men who probably one of the people who I respect most in the world right now. Uh, I just have an incredible amount of respect for everything he does, his intellect, and he's going to be. I think he's going to be a really fascinating interview as well because he's so knowledgeable on so many different things. So I'm looking forward to it. Uh, yeah. Anything else, Ben?
Nah. All
All
right.
right.
Thank you guys for coming. Thank you for listening as always. Next week we'll have something else. Maybe a history lesson. Maybe who knows. We'll talk later. Bye.